Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 5th of June 2024, coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7URP. Great to have you on board. On tonight's show, Anthony K8ZT and Dennis W6DQ are here live for the second in a series of 4 talks on HF for beginners. We have club news and with lots of pictures from radioactive and field days at the weekend. Oh, that grass was lovely there. I didn't feel it on Thursday, did it, when we went over there? And, of course, we find out what on earth this is. And if you didn't get an email to us, and you could pop it onto BATC or Facebook now, and we'll read it out when we read out the solutions. But first this week, our club news is dominated by radioactive. I think the best way, really, is they say pictures worth 1,000 words. We've put together a little video from several of your pictures that you sent to us, and we thought you'd like to see. So if you didn't make it, this is what you missed. And if you did make it, hopefully this will remind you of some good times over the weekend. Here we go. There we are. I hope that's a good reminder. Sorry if we didn't get all of your pictures. I know young Frankie and Jack sent us lots in particular. We couldn't use them all from this time, but hopefully there's some pictures there that will remind you of the weekend and show you what you missed if you didn't make it. So hopefully we'll do something similar in a year's time. Radioactive 25. I've got an email from the president who's asked me to read this to you and also to put it onto the newsletter this week. So I'll read it verbatim as he's put it. I would like to put, oh, by the way, the president, of course, is Malcolm G3PDH. I would like to put on record my thanks to everyone involved in putting on the NARC activities at Great Ellingham last weekend. Despite the poor weather leading up to it and site conditions, it came good and provided an excellent weekend of radio operation and social activity for the club. Foremost, I must emphasise our thanks again to David and Tammy for the use of their facilities and hospitality which made this possible. Also, special thanks to Sonny for his tremendous efforts throughout the lead-up and during the weekend, attending to the numerous logistics of help and transportation in moving the heavy equipment around and keeping things going. My thanks also to all the helpers and ops that kept the NFD station going for most of the 24 hours and resulted in a good number of contacts despite the potential adjudication issues surrounding the political handling of scores. It was a shame that our multiband ATU, created by Paul G3SEM, could not be used due to technical issues that we hope to resolve for next time. Similarly, all expressions of thanks apply to everyone involved with setting up and operating the 6-metre contest station, adding to the value of the weekend and in representing the efforts and tenacity of NARC members. 7-3 Malcolm G3PDH. Thank you very much for that, Malcolm, and that applies, of course, to all of you in whichever way you helped, supported this event. Thanks from Tammy and me as well for supporting it. We've got some news next of our raffle. And we're going to show you a picture now of our raffle table if you didn't see it on a newsletter. Quite a generous raffle table there. In fact, that grew a little bit after we took that picture because people kindly brought extra prizes and things like that. So, round of drums, and we tell you what we raised. And us tell you that all of the money goes to two charities that are very close to Tammy and my heart. Because we host the event, we fund it, if you like. We pay for everything. There's no cost to the club. So we ask for the money raised through this only to go to Cancer Research and Alzheimer's Society. And I'm delighted to tell you that on the raffle, well, which was supported, by the way, with the sponsors providing the prizes of BHI, DCP, Gagemaster, JPR Electronics, Martin Lynch and Sons, and of course several members who added things over the weekend, we raised £379 just from that raffle. So that was wonderful. And also I can tell you that the sale of some surplus things that we had left over at DCP, we raised £120. And if you add those two together, we get £499. Now, of course, we'll divide those to the two charities, but I thought it was a bit hard to have that very awkward, odd number. So I had a look on Tammy's chair in her bedroom earlier on, and she had a pair of jeans, and in the bottom of the jeans, I found one of those. So, Tammy, are you willing to?
I'm sure that'll be fine.
So we've raised £500 for those wonderful charities. Thanks to all of you in every way, honestly. Even if you just turned up and you were still supporting the event, and I know lots of you must have bought raffle tickets seeing that number. So fantastic, thank you. Now, a few bits of wrap-up information. I've mentioned this on an extra newsletter I sent a couple of days ago. But as you know, Steve G0KY gave a wonderful talk on the Slim Jim antenna, and we made some special kits up based on some notes as well that he prepared. So if you'd like a copy of those notes, that's absolutely free. Just drop me an email to the usual address, and we will email you here's the address at the bottom of your screen, radio@dcpmicro.com, and we'll email you a copy of his instructions. But better still, if you'd like to buy a kit, we bought some extras. They're £5, and that buys you the length of ladder line, the all-important antenna bases of it, 5 metres of RG58 mil-spec cable, and a PL259, and that's £5. And I'll take those to the club, to CNS, so you'll be able to pick one up there for £5 anytime. Also, we had a wonderful presentation from Teamwave on Saturday afternoon, telling us about a lot of the modern very modern, up-to-date technologies used with VHF, and he even showed a great demonstration of AI via amateur radio, which was fascinating as well. It was pretty good, asking what the various modes, why you would use certain modes and things like that, and this AI came back with a really good answers, I thought anyway. Thanks very much to them, and they've also made their slides available, and they're on the website. The link for that is fairly complex, so I won't put it on the screen here, but it's on our website and also on a newsletter coming your way. Kanga kits. Now, as you may remember, we offered 3 different Kanga kits at the weekend. We offered 1 receiver and 2 transceivers. Those were the 2 new roosters. Well, they were very pleased with the numbers of people who bought them. I think we sold 6 or 7 kits in advance, and they've kindly offered to extend that until the end of June, that offer of 20% off anything they sell. That's just for NARC members. If you want to order something, you can do it yourself. You don't need to order it through me. All you do is go to the Kanga Kits website and enter NARC in the coupon code as you check out, and it will take 20% off your whole order. But it's only till the end of June. I know Steve M0KRU asked me as well if we could supply any more after the weekend. So this is why I went back to them and asked them, and they said they would extend that offer 20% off any Kanga product until the end of the month. So please take advantage of that. Even if you're not feeling like making kits in this weather, when it gets colder and darker later in the year, I'm sure you'll appreciate it then to have to be able to get a kit at a lower price. On a similar vein, Dick G3WRJ gave us a great talk on QRP, and in particular his experiences with the QCX kits. Well, since Dick did those work, of course, there's a more modern, more up-to-date radio they brought out called the QMX, and also the QMX Plus, which is just a larger version, easier to build with more conventional components. Now that is a 160 metre to 6 metre radio. It does data modes and CW, but later on there is going to be an SSB option. So it's quite a formidable transceiver really in its own right. It's around about $125 if you buy one of these kits, plus carriage. And there's an optional case as well, very nice metal case, all aluminium case, all silk screened and everything, for another $25. Well, a couple of people expressed an interest in that and said, could we arrange a bulk buy to get a discount? Well, I'm not sure how much discount we'll get off the kits, because I don't know how many of you would want one. But I do think there would almost certainly be a saving on carriage in particular, because that's one of those things, it will come by FedEx or DHL, one of those sort of places from where Hans makes these kits in Turkey. So if you are interested in a QMX or a QMX Plus, or possibly one of the other kits as well, we'll get a bulk order together, but you do need to email me. I'll see how many people email me by next Wednesday. That's the sort of deadline. radio@dcpmicro.com. Just tell me what you're interested in. I think the QMX is probably the one to go for myself, but have a look. And we'll see if we can get a bulk order together, and we'll just share the carriage. It'll all be at cost. The club or I won't make any money from it, but it might make a significant saving, especially if we can get half a dozen or so people ordering that. And one other thing, and I forgot to bring it in here, someone on the Saturday who came to Radioactive forgot their lunchbox, and there's an apple in there and a banana. Not sure how long we'll be going to keep those things, but anyway, if you did leave your lunchbox here on Saturday, let me know and I'll bring it along to the club the next meeting, which is next Wednesday or whenever to suit you. I don't just want to just throw it away, but obviously we'll have to look at the fruit and things in there
we'll chuck those, but we don't want to chuck the lunchbox.
No, I'll give you a week to.
It's a see-through sort of.
Yes, that's right. A sort of Tupperware type clip brown box. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So thanks very much again for everybody involved with Radioactive, whether you helped put it on or whether you just came and participated, or you gave some money for the raffle prizes, because it's a fantastic effort. Thank you. On to other things now, and already we're in a new month, and it means that it's time for, because it's the second Saturday of the month, it's time for our condensed sked. Here we are, is the details, usual details, 7.123 megahertz at 10 a.m. on Saturday. And there's a local talking on 145.250, although the net controller for this will be Marco DM5HL. And finally on Club News, I've got some special dates for your diary, which I haven't quoted publicly yet before and not on NARC Live. These are dates for your diary. Please put them in there now. So here we are. On Sunday, the 23rd of June, we've got Radio by the Seaside at West Runton. we've got permission again to use an exclusive area up on the cliffs there. It's just before the sort of schools break up. And I hope that a lot of you will join us there. I will put more details in the newsletter before that, but please put it in your diary. And then if you're interested in the direction finding fox hunts that we do, the friendly one is on Monday the 24th of June, and will again be going from Thorpe Recreation Ground. Again, I will put more details in the diary and into the newsletters nearer the time, but you do need to commit these to your diary. And also the trophy fox hunt, which is the one for obviously for the trophy, is the Monday the 22nd of July. And you can see squeezed into those is the Barford Radio Rally, which I think most of you know now, is on Sunday the 7th of July at Barford. As I said, fine details of these all nearer the time, but please put them in your diary now. I've just got time for one bit of members news this week, and this is from Paul G3VPT. And he said, on the weekend before last, Bob G7JTZ, Colin G000R and Paul G3VPT set up a special event call sign GB0WAW at the annual Scouting Water Activities Weekend at Decoy Broad. In addition to water activities, there were many land-based activities, and also we had our Radio Shack. The RSGB video for youngsters showing NARC and the Tim Peake contact with the space station was on a repeating loop. And we had a radio station on many bands and told the visitors of the origin of radio from the early Morse code days, and the visitors could have a go at sending and receiving. They were told how to use the Morse key, etc. And Roger and Jim will probably know what I'm going to say now. He says, we had two young girls not having ever seen a Morse code key before, and before long they were sending perfect Morse. And when asked, one played the clarinet and piano, and the other played a flute. And they had, as Paul said, we had exactly the same on the foundation course. Sorry we haven't got any pictures to share with you on that, but because it was a scout event, we're not permitted to show those. But anyway, Paul, thank you very much for letting us know, and thanks to the work that you and Bob and Colin put into the scouts that weekend. I'm sure some of those, will come back and ask what radio is all about, and hopefully join the hobby later on. That's it from the main news. Let's go over to Tammy now for some little people, which I haven't seen this week.
Yep, here's the little people this week. Have you ever wondered what happens when your computer freezes?
A different sort of freeze, yes. I love it. That looks like an Apple keyboard as well.
It might be.
That excites me even more. Let me have a look at the one here. Yeah, similar. Brilliant. Miniature-calendar.com, a new picture every day, and Tammy picks one for us every week. Thanks very much, Tammy. It's really good. So what have you been doing? I had a little bit of news. We have that news from Paul this week, but I know it's been a busy time for radio. But do let us know. We'll meet here again in 2 weeks' time. Send your details of your pictures of things that you've been doing that you think will interest other members to this address, radio@dcpmicro.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Now on to the competition, which we set 2 weeks ago tonight, when we asked you, what on earth is this? And we have had quite a diverse number of entries. I'm not going to say if any were right or wrong yet, as you will see. So let's have a look firstly on YouTube and Facebook. Let's see.
I haven't seen any.
Have anybody entered a question?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. All right. So let's have a look at what we've heard from. Steve G3EVA was first entering and said, I believe that the object is a purse or handbag hook. Have one for my own handbag, he says.
Nev M0NFY, probably wrong, but I think it could be a very pretty rear view mirror for a motor scooter as ridden by the mods of yesteryear.
Oh, yes.
Actually, to be fair, that picture, you can't tell the size of it, can you?
No. Well, no, you can't. And I can believe that. Ken M0KJW is simply a hook used by ladies to hold their handbags to the edge of the table. Not seen one of those in ages. And he does add here, and I left this in, hopefully by the time you've read this, you and Tammy have recovered from the excitement of the football. What can he mean, Tammy?
I'm not sure I'll ever recover from the excitement of the football, but anyway.
FA Cup final, if you're wondering.
Mike, I think this is a Victorian hearing aid. The screen captures the sound's vibes, and the tube carries it to the inner ear.
I can get that as well. Martin at G7UGB, I think the mystery object this week is a hook for a lady's handbag, And I'm sure Mum had one at one time.
Jonathan M1ADX, we think it is a bookmark.
Yeah, get that as well. David G3VSJ says, for this week's What's This? I'm thinking a rear view of a bathroom makeup or shaving mirror.
Colin M0GMK, I think this week's object is a portable hanger for a bag. The disc sits flat on the tabletop or a shelf and the bag hangs underneath.
Okay, so we've got a really diverse range of answers there, but now we're going to find out what on earth it really is.
It was a handbag or purse hook.
Yep, there it is.
You hang it on the side of the table so you don't have to put your handbag on the floor where all the beer's been spilt in a pub.
Yeah, well, other places are
available. Other places are available.
But yes, anyway, thank you very much to Colin M7OPB for that. We're getting low again. We had quite a flurry of people sending in, so if you've got some unusual objects just like that, do send them to us and we can use them in the competitions of the coming weeks and months. Thank you. So now, before we go over to our guests for tonight's talk, we've just got time now.
Are we actually just going to see what next week's is?
That's right. I've even got it on the script and I just went over it. So, okay, so you've got that one. Let's see, what on earth is this? Well, I'm going to tell you. Obviously, you've got to enter it. Sorry. What do you think these are for, or what do you think they're called, or anything like that? Let us know. radio@dcpmicro.com. You've got just under 2 weeks. If we need to know by about 3 o'clock on the Wednesday.
We just had a late entry for the one that we've just done. And David M7BLX says, is it a sewing machine oil can?
Oh, not sewing machines again. Don't you awaken Nev and he'll be saying, oh no, getting him all excited again. Sorry about that, David. We just saw it there. Anyway, this is the new what on earth. This isn't a sewing machine oiler or anything like that.
It might be, you never know.
Well, it could be. But what is it? So you've got one thing you know it isn't. What do you think that or they are for? Let us know by 3 o'clock on Wednesday week, please. Now I've got just time to tell you about what's happening this week at the club. So at 10 o'clock on Saturday, it's the Koblenz Sked on 7.123 megahertz, our monthly Sked with our twin city in Germany. Sunday at 7 o'clock, the GB2RS News on GB3MB. On Monday at 7:30, the Monday Night Net on GB3MB. And at 8 o'clock, the 80 meter CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, a week from tonight, June the 12th, it's an informal social meeting at CNS as well. And don't forget to keep sending us your pictures and your mystery objects for What on Earth. And also, of course, this card, which we're always happy to send to anybody who you feel will be cheered by it. It's from Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. There's pictures of some of our activities. And we're happy to send this to anybody at all. They don't have to be an amateur, a member of the club or anything like that. Just send us the address to radio@dcpmicro.com and we'll be pleased to send it on your behalf. Well, now, 2 weeks ago tonight, we started a series all about supporting you, whether you're a beginner to the hobby or whether you're someone who's maybe returned to the hobby after some time, on HF. So we've called it HF for beginners. And with us, joining Anthony K8ZT this week is Dennis, W6DQ. So hello to both of you. Hello. Can you hear us?
Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, Dennis.
Greetings.
Dennis, nice to meet you as well for the first time, I think.
For us. Good. Still morning here.
Good evening. Hello, Dennis. Dennis, nice to meet you.
Oh,
I think there's a delay,
we're not getting any
actually.
audio.
I can hear
I'm
this
not getting
quite
any
an
audio
delay.
here.
Really?
Oh, rats.
Okay.
Hang
Let
on a
us
second.
just...
I'll go back here again.
Oh, can you hear me now, Dennis?
Okay.
Let us just...
I'll go back.
I think...
Yeah.
Yeah, Dennis, if you're watching this
David,
on you...
I'm not getting any audio on your Zoom feed. I had BATC going for a while and Facebook going in the background, but
don't run it.
not
But
hearing
can I
it
suggest to you, don't run it on Facebook or BATC because you're going to have a
Anthony,
delay.
are you hearing
a
me?
significant
No, I'm not
delay.
hearing any. I'm hearing you, Dennis, but I'm not hearing David.
You're not hearing me either.
Because you're going to have a
Anthony,
delay.
are you hearing
a
me?
significant
No, I'm not
delay.
hearing any.
It's funny because
I'm
I
not
can
hearing
hear a
David.
delay.
You're not hearing me because you're going to have a
Anthony,
delay.
are you hearing me?
Okay, we're going to check out things here. This has never happened like
No,
this.
no.
But I can hear myself with a delay.
Okay, we're going to check out things here. This is
With a significant
but I
delay.
can hear myself with a delay. Okay, we're going to check.
So just bear with us. Sorry, everybody at home. As part of last weekend, we were doing
No, it's not that.
external microphone.
That is
What about built-in microphone? There. Tammy, that one. Just do that one. See if that works. Can you hear us now? Anthony, can you hear us?
Okay, let me just go back to that.
Sorry about this. There's not much we can do except those of you who came on the studio tour this weekend, you'll know. Can you hear us now?
Yes, we can.
Ah, and can you hear me, Dennis?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much.
Oh, excellent.
I'm going
Okay.
to
Well, I don't know what we
scratch
really did
this
there,
window.
but we've actually gone to a slightly different route of getting the audio to you. You can hear us now in the studio from a microphone built into the laptop that we've got that on, rather than a normal audio feed from our mixer. Just to explain it, because we're all radio amateurs and we understand the technical side. So anyway, I'm really delighted that you can hear us and join us. It worked all right a little while ago with Anthony. We're going to leave it to you anyway now. This is what we always do. We leave the talk to yourselves. But if you've got any questions for Dennis or Anthony during this talk, then please pop them onto Facebook or BATC, and of course we'll read them to them at the end. But now over to you, and once again, Dennis, welcome to NARC.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And sorry that I missed the last presentation. We were actually, if I remember the date, we were still out in Dayton, Ohio at Hamvention. We were returning home here to California.
Yes.
So I was unavailable.
So we're ready to jump into week 2, but again, just a repeat of my contact information, a picture of my shack, and here's Dennis's. Again, the slideshow for all 4 episodes is the same one slideshow. It's at tiny.cc/UKBGHF, or you can shoot the QR code that's included in here. Also, throughout the presentation, there are links for more information. So if you go to the slideshow, you can click on those links. They'll be in this font and or have this little symbol to let you know. So what we're going to talk about this evening is acquiring equipment and antennas and feed lines. So when you're choosing a radio, there's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of different things. And I sort of equate buying a radio to buying an automobile, in that there's a lot of different choices, a lot of different styles, models, fanciness. Two of the good things is, though, they're not quite as expensive as automobiles, and the depreciation is not as bad either. So that first slide was currently available radios. These are radios that have been produced in the last 20 or so years. And then you could even go back further. These are all radios that are getting up to 30 to 40 years in age now. And we're suggesting that even though these are great hobbies, and Dennis and I are both involved in restoring and maintaining radios like this, as a newcomer, you're probably better off starting off with something a little closer in vintage. Just like an automobile, again, having an antique automobile is a chore, but it is a love. But you probably want to start out with a car that you can drive every day. So we're going to talk today about HF radios. There's a whole group of VHF, UHF radios out there, but we're not going to look at that topic. But we are going to mention that HF radios do also come in models that do include VHF and UHF. They're not as common, but there are some out there as combos. And HF radios are available as base units, mobile or portable units, or even single band units. This slide may look a little intimidating and confusing, but what you need to realize about this is the first thing, each little section of the slide has nothing to do with the rest of the slide. And what we're going to do is, I'm just going to go through some different typical features that you might find on your radio that you're shopping for an HF radio. Typically the power out is about 100 watts, although there are alternatives for anywhere from 5 to 20 watts or even 200 watt radios. As far as bands go, typical radios we're talking about are multi-band. They include all the HF bands from 160 to 10 meters, and most of them also include one of the VHF bands, 6 meters. That's been a rather recent addition, but a welcome one. But there are single band radios. There's even some 4-band radios, 5-band radios. And as I mentioned earlier, there's some HF radios that also include VHF and UHF. As far as form factors go, typically you're going to be getting a base unit, but there are also some mobile units designed for being in a vehicle, and some portable units. The difference between portable and mobile is mainly the fact that most portable units have a battery or a way to attach a battery to it. As battery operated goes, typically most HF radios, unlike VHF and UHF handhelds, do not have a battery built in, although there are some that do. Sound card. A sound card is typically built into most newer models, but there are some that do not. If you get a radio without a sound card and you're interested in doing the sound card modes, though, that's not difficult to add an external sound card interface. In our next column, we have tuning control. Typically, the traditional idea of turning a knob on the front of the radio to tune it and adjusting power, volume, etc. with knobs was the only way to go. But in recent years, we've had a number of radios that have included computer control. Some of them have even no knobs on them at all and require a computer to control the radio. Some have some capability, and they might even have an external control panel to operate the radio. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the technical aspects of these radios, and that's the mixing scheme. That's the way we take radio frequencies and make them into audio frequencies that we can hear. Typically, this was done with a super heterodyne type of arrangement for many, many years, but fairly recently, the idea of software-defined, direct software-defined, or hybrid software-defined mixing schemes has developed. Also, some people went back to something that was a very old concept but has been made new again, and that's direct conversion, where we take one radio frequency and directly convert it to an audio frequency without intermediate frequencies such as the super heterodyne. This is way beyond the scope of today's talk for the most part, but if you notice on the side here, there's 3 links that will give you more information on mixing schemes. So if you're interested in this sort of technical aspect, take a look by clicking on one of these links. It'll take you out to that information. Performance. The great news is most currently produced radios have very good performance, and it's not going to be an issue. But just like automobiles, if you're interested in higher performance, you can put out more money and purchase a very high performance radio. Or you can put out less money and buy an economical or economy version of a radio with less features, less performance, but a lower price. Vintage, we suggest you look at something that's currently available, or at least something that's been built since 2000 to start out with. Save the older radios, the tube radios, the hybrid radios, for collectors or for other alternatives, as opposed to making it your everyday radio, unless you're Dennis and he maintains a whole studio full of these older radios. And finally, you can either buy a new radio or you can buy a used radio. If you're buying a new radio, you're going to be buying something that's currently available, but if you're buying a used radio, you might be buying a vintage radio or even a new radio that someone decided to get rid of. Not all radios are equal. Some are better at CW than others. Filtering is a key here. Some work great for single sideband, but if you want to operate digital modes, you may need to add an external sound card interface. Some have built-in antenna tuners, but these typically have very limited ranges. Others can tune very wide ranges. It may or may not be, the antenna tuner may not be needed if you're using all resonant antennas or feeding an amplifier. Some radios have built-in sound cards, mostly newer models, making digital sound card modes such as FT8, FT4 much easier, but you can easily add an external sound card interface for less than $100. If you don't operate FT8 and FT4, you still may want sound card capability for doing things like sending single sideband messages from a bank so you don't have to wear your voice out during a contest, recording on-air audio to a computer, or to work some traditional modes such as RTTY. Used radios are great buy. Some used radios are great buys, others are projects at best. And not all radios are equal. Some cheap radios may actually cost more after adding the missing features that you want or need. Sometimes the solution is actually 2 or more radios. A starter, inexpensive used radio until you get an idea of what you want or need for HF, or possibly an inexpensive compact radio for use while hiking, doing parks on the air, or maybe even a 100-watt mobile for your vehicle. And then a traditional 100-watt base unit for shack use. The secret that most people don't realize when they first start studying to be a ham is you probably won't just end up with one radio, and you probably won't just end up with one antenna. And finally, If you're just interested in getting started with HF and you don't have the money or funds right now or a way to put up an antenna, you can still listen to HF radio by using free online software-defined receivers around the world. And I have a whole presentation on that. If you click on the link tiny.cc free RX, it'll take you out to a handout that I use quite often for working with youth, students, or new groups that are just getting started with radio. This basically tells you what is out there, gives you an idea of how to access them, how to tune them, and basically the frequencies you'd want to be listening to. There's also another presentation on using online software-defined radios for not just listening to, but using them in conjunction with your main HF station. So you can get on and try things out for free without even having to have a radio or an antenna. And finally, to help you out with purchasing a radio, I have a slideshow on buying amateur radio equipment, and then a spreadsheet that compares current and previously available models with features that you can take a look at. Both of these are again available by clicking on the links in the slideshow. Now let's go ahead and turn it over to Dennis.
All right, thank you, Anthony. What we're going to talk about now is what are the components of an HF station? What do you need to put together your first station? Well, at the top of that list is an HF transceiver, and that's what Anthony's just been speaking about. But there's some other bits and pieces that have to go along with that, like a power supply, antennas, bead line, microphone, or even possibly a CW key. Next slide. So a typical HF station, here you go. Here we have our radio, that HF transceiver, which is that FT911 Yaesu. You got a microphone for that. You've got a 12-volt power supply. This is a 12-volt. This radio does operate off of 12 volts DC. Fused power cable, very important that the cable itself is fused. And of course, coax going out to the outside antenna. So some of the things that you might add to that station are things like an antenna tuner. Now, an antenna tuner, the purpose of that is to basically match the impedance, the impedance of the antenna to the output impedance of the transmitter, which can be important. We talk about SWR and losses due to SWR. You want to have a good match between the antenna and the transmitter. And if the antenna is not matched, it's not the most ideal situation. Some radios have what is called a sound card interface. They actually have a built-in sound card in the radio, which makes it very easy to interface to a computer. They may have a built-in keyer for CW. They may have a voice keyer. Voice keyers are fascinating. If you're doing contesting, which Anthony also will be talking about. I think you talk about that in here. Voice keyer will save your voice in a contest. When you're calling CQ contest for 24 hours straight, the voice keyer will do that for you, which is a wonderful item. CAT computer and software. So the CAT interface, this is a standardized interface in the industry for connecting a computer to your radio. And it does things like controlling the frequency and mode and various other parameters of the radio. You may have a directional antenna, a Yagi, or some such. So you'd need a rotator and a control box for that Yagi to be able to point it in different directions. You may have multiple radios, or you might have multiple antennas, so you need a way to switch between those as well. So that's the coax cable AV switch. And with multiple radios running on 12 volts, you might need some type of a DC power distribution system. So that's to the typical pieces. So for the power supply, we're going to talk about this a little bit. The types of power supplies, there's essentially two types of power supplies. A linear power supply uses a transformer to step down voltage to whatever you're using. 12 volts typically is 12 volts of voltage. And because it uses a transformer, it's going to be quite heavy. A switching power supply, the other type of power supply, does not use a transformer, but actually uses a chopper circuit to interrupt the voltage coming in. It rectifies it, interrupts it, and then changes it through a network in the power supply, but it's switching at like 100 kilohertz or 250 kilohertz instead of at 50 hertz, which reduces the weight of the power supply incredibly. So switching power supplies are very lightweight. Each has its advantages, and Anthony has a link here on this slide which says linear versus switching, which power supply is best. each have their positives and each have their negatives. The problems with switching power supplies is that they sometimes, if they're not properly shielded, will generate interference on HF. And of course, the problems with a linear power supply are weight. So the output of the power supply, we typically refer to that as 12 volts DC, but it's nominally 13.8 volts, and that's based on a typical automobile battery, 13.8 volts. So that's the nominal voltage of a typical power supply we use with our radio. And in terms of the current or the amperage required by that power supply, a typical 100 watt HF rig will require between 18 to 25 amps during transmit, significantly less during receive. And it's fine to have a power supply that's at a greater amperage rating or greater power rating, especially if you're going to use multiple rigs. So in other words, if your rig requires, let's say, 25 amps, having a 30 or a 40 amp power supply is not a problem, and it allows you to add another radio to that power supply. So continuing on with power system is power wiring. One of the things we have to be concerned about is wire diameter, the gauge of the wire. And a smaller wire will cause greater voltage lock. It is not a may cause greater voltage drop. It will cause a greater voltage drop with high current. So you got to be careful that your wire gauge is compatible with the current requirements of the radio, and you need to use good connectors. A bad connector will cause loss in the circuit. It will also cause heating, can cause fire. So you have to be careful of these things. The newer cables fuse both the positive and negative wires. These are cables that are provided with a typical modern radio. We like to use something called an Anderson power pole. We've kind of standardized on that in our emergency communications community here in the States. Anderson power poles are really great for being able to connect and disconnect radios. In fact, you can actually get a little distribution box that has a bunch of Anderson power poles. These cables are what we call hermaphrodite. So there's no male or female connector. They will all connect together no matter what they are. So a typical Anderson power pole will connect to the same Anderson power pole. So we color code them, and of course these are mechanically connected together. We can put them into different configurations for polarization and what have you. Now, Anthony, these videos, I presume, are all on, are those on Anderson power poles? I don't think I've ever looked at those. They are on Anderson power poles. I think that talks about installing them and using them and all of that. And yeah, I think Anderson power poles, I don't have one handy here to show. Actually, I do. Yeah, I do have a typical power cable that I'll show you on here. This is a typical power cable with we were talking about the ICOM 7300. And this has the connector at one end that will connect to the radio. At the other end, I have an Anderson power pole, and there are the two fuses that are in line. So this is to operate my 7300 or my 9700 ICOM that I have here. So I mentioned the distribution. These are a number of companies make these. MFJ, West Mountain Radio. I kind of like the West Mountain Radio distribution systems, but these are all great for using multiple radios on Anderson power poles. So you provide your 30 or 40 whatever power supply you have, 30 or 40 amp, to the distribution block, and then you can plug multiple radios, and each one is individually fused, and you can use different size fuses depending on what the load is. So for, say, some accessory, you might use a 5 amp or less fuse, but for your main radio, you might use a 20 or 25 amp fuse for that particular radio, and they're typical automotive fuses. So what other things do you need for your station? Well, typically, you'll need to add something like a microphone if it's not included. And of course, a lot of radios come with microphones. This happens to be the one that came with the 7300. That comes with the radio, thankfully. You don't have to buy a separate microphone, but a lot of radios don't have the mic included. If you're going to use that computer interface, you'll need an interface cable. So depending on the radio, for instance, the 7300 ICOM, that uses a USB cable to interface both CAT and the built-in sound card within the radio. So you just plug it into a USB port on your computer, and you install whatever software you're planning on using with that radio, and configure the USB port to support both the audio and the CAT controls, which control the frequency, as I mentioned, the frequency mode, push to talk, that type of thing. Older radios may use an RS-232 or a proprietary connection. And you might use that to a USB cable. And this is an important point. To interface your computer, you need some type of a serial, RS-232 serial to USB converter. And you want to avoid the cheap ones. Go with the one that uses what's called an FTDI chip. This will give you a lot less grief, a lot less problems, and they tend to work right out of the box. So there's a lot of times running this with things like Microsoft Windows, it will install the drivers automatically and configure it as soon as you hook it up. So it's a good thing to know. Some operators like headphones. It's easier to hear, especially people like me who have poor hearing. As I get older, it's harder and harder to hear. So headphones are really great, especially if you're in poor conditions. I would suggest the highest quality headphones that you can buy, that you can afford. There's a lot of good ones out there. I don't have them sitting here. The ones I use are from a company called Radio Sport. I don't have any affiliation with Radio Sport other than the fact that the fellow that owns it is a good friend of mine, and I love the products. They are a bit pricey, but they are wonderful. They're comfortable and they are indestructible. So highly recommended headphones. You can do voice hands-free operation with a headset with an attached mic, a boom microphone. I think that's kind of what Anthony has there in his you can see him in the video there, his headphone with an attached boom mic. And that's what I use with the Radio Sports. I have several sets of those that I use with my radios. And you can either use a push to talk. In the case of the radios I can have a push to talk on the microphone. So like on a desk mic, I've got a push to talk there. The headset with a boom mic, you might have a push to talk switch that's external that you just hold in your hand and push the button. You can have a foot switch for PTT. I tend to not like the foot switch because I tend to be hunting for it under the desk. I can never find it. So I like having something I can actually hold in my hand. And of course, most radios include something called VOX, which stands for voice operated transmit. And so when you start talking, the radio automatically goes into transmit mode. And when you stop talking, it goes back to receive. And that can be problematic too if you tend to be chatty while you're receiving, which is something I tend to do. I can't use Vox because I make too much noise while I'm operating, so it tends to get in the way. But
I wanted to mention something. About portable operations.
Oh yeah.
Especially headphones are especially important. You don't realize ahead of time how much traffic noise, how much wind noise, even in a very isolated area, and that can cause problems hearing. It can also cause problems with false activation of Vox. So
yes.
Be aware that when you're operating POTA or SOTA or just operating portable in your vehicle, there might be a lot more ambient sound than you expect.
So a good noise canceling microphone is important. So we're going to talk about on single sideband, one of our modes we can operate. You can adjust the mic for your voice and your specific mic so that the radio might have some settings. Modern radios do have a lot of settings to contour the audio for your specific voice. And that's kind of a nice feature, but it's one you have to play around with. It's understand how it works and what it does. But things like the obvious things like mic gain are important. Somebody will get a radio and they'll turn the mic gain all the way up to 10 or 11, as the case may be, and that's not good. That can create distortion. It can create interference by overmodulating the radio and creating all kinds of distortion. So the mic gain is important that you don't get into distortion, or what we call, before I mentioned compression, you don't want the radio to go into compression without the compressor operating. Now there's a compressor that you're going to have, that a lot of radios have, that's specifically to increase what we call the talk power on single sideband. So in other words, it takes the lower level signals and brings them up so that the average signal level is higher. So if you look at that on a spectrum display or on a band scope or one of the web SDRs, you'll see the envelope of the signal will become higher all the time. and then it'll only drop when the person stops talking. And what that does is it increases the overall power, the power density of the signal. You get what we call more talk power, which is an important thing. Other radios have additional audio settings on transmit. I have my Flex radio here has all kinds of crazy stuff in it with different types of compression. It has equalizers, so you can change the frequency response depending on the microphone. I have multiple microphones, so different microphones have different audio contours. So the equalizer, I can save those settings and bring them back, recall them and set it up for that particular microphone. Some of the links here, reducing splatter, that's a big deal. And we're very critical about maintaining a quality, clean signal. So Anthony's link here, splatter does matter. And you'll see that especially on if you go to one of the web SDRs and you start looking, there's the difference between a clean signal, that normal signal with 2.7 kilohertz, and a signal that's splattering, that's taking up 10 kilohertz or more. We've seen much more than that on the bands. This is referred to as splatter, and it's because something's being overdriven. It could be the mic overdriving the audio stages. It can be the mic gain overdriving the PA, the amplifier, the RF amplifier, the power amplifier in the radio. Or if you're using an external amplifier, you could be overdriving that amplifier. So there's all kinds of ways to produce splatter, but it's something to be well aware of. So Anthony's got another link here that goes to a page on basically creating really good quality audio that was great for contesting. Get yourself heard without creating splatter. And I like that Steve Katz, the link there to Steve's talk about, it's not your microphone, it's you. Yeah, it's true. So yeah, that's a good thing to be aware of is mic settings, very important. So one of the other components we talked about was the antenna. And this...
And I'll take over now.
Oh yeah, that's right. You take this over. I'm sorry.
No problem. So you need a basic antenna. And again, just like I said earlier, your first radio probably won't be your last radio, and definitely your first antenna won't be your last antenna. So one of the things I really stress to new hams, and I just had a new ham call me up this week and said, Anthony, I want to get on the air. Which beam should I go and tower should I go out and buy? And I said, well, hold on a minute. Let's start a little bit easier and get you on the air first, then we'll worry about that. So one of the simplest antennas is an HF dipole antenna. 2 lengths of wire separated by an insulator and fed with your coax. The insulators don't need to be this fancy depicted glass here. They can be a simple adult 1 pound keyboard, a 1 pound cutting board that you pick up at your local thrift store. Plastic can be cut up and you can make your own insulators if you want to. You'll notice that as the frequency goes down, and the bandwidth goes up, the width of the antenna, the length between these two segments, will increase drastically. So a 6-meter antenna is only about 9 foot in total length, whereas a 160-foot antenna is over 260 foot in length across here. So the length can really make a big difference on this antenna. It's based on the frequency. Now, sometimes you need 2 supports for this typical antenna, but maybe you only have 1 support. So you can take the same dipole, support the center, and bring the 2 ends down in what we refer to as an inverted V shape. The other advantage, besides only 1 support, is the total length from here to here is less in an angled format, so you can get it into a slightly smaller space. But there's a wide variety of antennas. There's wire antennas such as the dipole, end-fed, the inverted V, slopers, inverted L, etc. There's antennas that are made out of a combination of feed line and a extended end. Lunaments such as verticals and beams, hybrid antennas made out of wire and support structures, loops, both horizontal and vertical, even compact transmitting loops, also often referred to as magnetic loops. And all of these different antennas have their use, and it's a whole thing to learn about antennas, and we could talk about that for another whole 4 sessions, but we're not going to do that. Let's just talk about a couple things. The first thing is, we can only scratch the surface on antennas, and the size and complexity of putting together the supporting structure, the antenna, the feed line, any zoning, household, freehold agreements you might have, or other restrictions can dwarf the other aspects of getting on HF. Buying the radio is easy, getting the antenna up can be very difficult. But you don't want to let that stop you. So that's why my suggestion is start simple with something like a dipole, inverted V, get on the air, and then worry about adding to that.
Anthony, that looks like a real rat's nest there.
Yeah, this is actually what happens quite often. If you wrap up wire and put it in a storage container, it will turn into a rat's nest very quickly.
Yep.
So you could even have what we refer to as hidden antennas or secret antennas, and this is a very interesting thing from a piece of war propaganda about worrying about spies in your area. So, but you can use some of these same things to get away with hiding an antenna. And actually, a group in Florida in the U.S. has a number of restrictions in their community, so they put together a whole guide on hidden and stealth antennas, and they grade each on an A through F scale for on-air capability, stealthiness, how difficult the install is, how much it costs, and which bands it works on. And you can click on this link and it'll take you out to their whole presentation on hidden antennas and stealthy antennas. Unfortunately, antennas can be the downfall for hams just starting out. There's lots of exaggeration and misinformation in the literature out there, both in person, online, written material, commercial hype, YouTubes, etc. There's way too much anecdotal evidence based on casual personal observations, such as, I worked blank with this antenna, so it must be great. Many of the issues are the result of trying to avoid large size, the necessary support and erection issues, necessary radials or counterpoise, undesired visibility, and the effort required in assembling it, constructing it, adjusting it, etc. So if you try and skip all these, you're going to end up with poor performance. So also, if you follow the hype, you might end up with something like this. It looks great. It fits in the palm of your hand. It extends out. It covers almost all the bands. You can make a contact on this. I've made a contact on one of these before, but that dipole I showed you before will run rings around this, and this costs quite a bit of money, and that dipole is almost free if you have a friend with some spare wire.
Anthony, how far away was the contact you made with the Miracle antenna?
Oh, halfway across the United States. I was running 5 watts too, but I could have made that contact a lot easier with a simple dipole.
Yeah. I was going to say across your yard or down the block.
There's even a gentleman who talks about making contacts with light bulbs, and he'll tell you which light bulbs are the best ones. So you can make a contact with anything, but I'd suggest sticking with some of the tried and true antenna patterns. I have a link here that goes all through the variety of antennas. I originally put this together for Field Day 2020 when many hams were forced with putting up their own antenna after using our club facilities. During the pandemic, they had to put up antennas. So I put this together talking about the pros and cons of a variety of different antenna types, and then for each type I have resources, including written resources, YouTubes, how-tos, and even in some cases commercial antennas you can buy for this particular thing. So this guide will help you picking out antennas for various purposes and give you some ideas of what's out there. This was my antenna farm until August of last year. I had a 50-foot tower, a sloper coming off of that, a beam on top of it, and a 43-foot vertical. Unfortunately, since then I had a windstorm that came through and tore the tower down. So now I'm strictly using a vertical, but there's different tools you can use to help figure out whether you can put an antenna on your property. Besides going out with the measuring tape, you can use Google Maps and use the measuring facility to see how far it is to that nearest tree. The next thing is the feed line, and I'm going to turn it over to Dennis for feed line discussion.
Okay, very good. Yeah. This is great discussion on antennas, and I was thinking about the station here at W6DQ. We have 9 antennas in the air here. I think that's right from the last count. There may be a couple more that I'm not considering, but that covers 160 meters through 70 centimeters. So we've got quite a bit of coverage here, and there's more coming that are on the ground right now. So just as important as the antenna, getting a good antenna up in the air is very important, but so is how you feed it, how you connect that antenna to your radio. Well, by far the most common thing you'll find is coaxial cable. And the most common coaxial cables that you'll find are either 50 ohm or 75 ohm. Now, the 50 ohm is typically what we use with amateur equipment, but 75 ohm you'll find for cable TV and video systems, and it's perfectly usable for amateur radio. You know, you can use that with a 50 ohm load, and it's not going to really create a problem for you. The losses are minimal. So if economy allows you to get 75 ohm CATV or video type cable TV cable, go for it, because it's definitely going to be more economical. But these are things that came about after the World War II, the use of coax. Prior to that, we used a lot of what we call open wire or open wire feed line or window line, which is a modern version, or TV twin lead, another modern version. You might be familiar with that last one, the TV twin lead. That's 300 ohm impedance. But open wire, or what we call ladder line, was very, very common back in the 30s and in the 40s and even later. And in fact, I use open wire line on my antenna for 160 meters here, which happens to be one of the antennas that Anthony mentioned, a horizontal loop. That's a one wavelength loop in the air with a 600 ohm feed line going to it. So that's typical type of feed line. Go ahead, Anthony. So coax, there's various types of coax. Multiple diameters, different types of insulators, different impedance, different loss. You might use different coax depending on the frequency that you're operating, power handling, the ability to withstand UV light. Very important if you're going to feed an antenna. It's obviously going to, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but presumably going to be outdoors. It needs to have UV resistance, and you might even be burying the feed line underground. So direct burial is important. And we use a combination of direct burial and feeding them through conduit here underground. As we say here, 50 ohms is typically used for ham radio. That's the most common type of coax you'll see. I mentioned the 75 ohm. It's typically used for like cable TV, and in computers, it's typically used for video interfaces. Again, depending on the manufacturer, the quality varies. You have to be careful of that. I will tell you that I recently purchased some RG8X off of Amazon and was very, very disappointed. It's unusable. I bought a 100-foot chunk of cable because the price was right. A bad choice. So you have to be careful of things like that. Different manufacturers. Go back for a second, Anthony. Other important factors, talking about time and use, exposure to elements, and mishandling. Kinking the cable, it has a minimum bend radius, and if you happen to exceed that minimum bend radius, you can damage the coax. Coax that's been out in the air for a long period of time, exposed to the elements, tends to degrade. So that's another thing. Used coax may not be something you want to do. Using the wrong power levels with the kind of coax that you pick, like using 1,000 watts with RG172 is not a good idea, because RG172 is tiny and 1,000 watts will tend to melt that cable. So something to be aware of. Go ahead. Okay, so I mentioned I said 172. It's actually RG174. RG174 is great inside a radio for running circuits around, but for using it for HF and VHF and things like that, it has a lot of loss because it's very, very tiny. RG58A/U is something we used many years ago. We don't use it as much anymore because it's been replaced by RG8X, which is roughly the same size, but has a much greater performance. So if you're buying new cars, RG8X is a good investment, and you can see the relative losses. These are dB losses per 100 feet of cable at each of these frequencies. So we're talking below 30 megahertz. You're looking at the loss there, 174. 5.5 dB a loss. That's a full S unit, believe it or not. That's pretty lossy at 30 megahertz. The 58 and the 59. 59 is the CATV material we were talking about. Cable TV, 75 ohms. It's going to have it's going to be good quality, and there's no reason why you can't use that for HF for connecting an antenna. RG8X is a very good piece of coax. LMR 240, another good product from a company called Times Microwave. And it's roughly equivalent to the RG8X. It's a 1/4 inch diameter, hence the name LMR 240. RG213, RG214, 9913, and LMR 400 are all half-inch diameter coax that have very, very good performance. And if you're running high power, very, very good choice to use any of those. The 213, 214, 9913. I use all of those here. We have quite a few thousand feet of coax installed here at W6DQ, and the majority of it is of those 4 brands. There are four types. LMR 400, and especially a version of LMR 400 called Ultraflex, is a delight to work with because it has a very tight turn radius. It's very easy to work with. LMR,
although the 9913 has good specs, it's not quite as flexible as the cables above it.
Right. And the LMR 400, the basic LMR 400 is very stiff. So if you need to have some kind of flexibility, LMR 400 is not a good choice. But Ultraflex is. Let's see. Coax connectors. Yeah, I'm trying to see where I don't break off yet. Okay, we're still going here. The most common connector we use is a PL259. And that's PL259 is the connector we use along with the SO239 is the socket. I had one sitting here on the desk. Yeah, there's an SO239 right there. This isn't actually an SO239. That's a PL259 end on an adapter that I have, but that's what the PL259 looks like right there. These are by far the most common. They're inexpensive. And people question, why is it called a UHF connector if it's really not usable above UHF? Well, at the time that was designed back in the late 30s and early 40s, UHF was considered anything above about 30 megahertz. So that's why it's called a UHF connector. They really don't want to be used above 2 meters. They tend to be lossy and cause all kinds of problems at the higher frequencies. So you have to be aware of that. So that's a PL259. There's different styles of PL259. There's types that you have to solder to the coax, and others that we crimp on. I tend to like the crimp for anything I'm doing indoors, and even some of the stuff I do outdoors. If you crimp it properly and put the proper weather protection against it, they're very, very good. They're easy to install. The next type of connector we have is a BNC connector, and these are frequently used as it says here in the chart, used on portable radios, QRP rigs, and test equipment, primarily because they're very compact for a portable radio. They're half the size of the PL259, very compact. If you're going into higher frequencies, handy talkies, of course, UHF, microwave, weak signal work, we use something called an SMA connector, which is very tiny. And they don't work. We don't try to use those at HF. Although, again, like you're talking about RG174, you could use SMA connectors with RG174 within a radio, within an HF radio for interconnecting modules and things like that. That's a perfect application for it because it's very compact. Now, another good connector is an N connector. And I like the N connectors because they are waterproof. So I tend to use those on antennas outdoors. These are good up into the microwave range. They are good to like 18 gigahertz. They are usable up to 18 gigahertz, just like the BNC, the same thing. The BNC actually uses the same connector structure as the N, except it's just smaller. You can actually plug an N connector into a BNC socket, believe it or not. You can't connect it, physically connect it mechanically, but it will plug in because the inner pieces of that connector are the same. But we like to use those. They're more difficult to install unless you use the crimp type connectors. The crimp connectors are extremely easy to install on N connectors on coax. So I like using those as well. The other connector that's out there that's used on cable TV and video, and you might use that on a receive-only antenna, and I agree with that. I have a receive array that uses F connectors. These are typically what you'd use on cable TV, and they're typically crimp-on connectors. They're easy to install, and they're inexpensive. So they all have their application. Go ahead.
And I just was listening to someone recently that said they make sure that they never use PL259s on receive-only antennas so that they don't
Oh,
accidentally transmit on them.
that's
So
uh,
it's not for purposes of technical purposes, but for just housekeeping purposes so that they wouldn't
that's
accidentally attach it.
that's probably not a bad idea, actually, Anthony. I've never heard somebody say that, but that makes sense to not use a PL59 and receive PL259 on receive only. Yeah, my only antennas do use F connectors for the connecting to the antennas and the preamps that are located at the antenna site, which is about 600 feet away at the other end of the property. But where it connects up here, it comes into a PL259. So what can I say? Oh, yeah, I mentioned this already. The different types of connectors can be installed differently. We talked about solder connectors and crimp type connectors. I really do like using the crimp connectors. They're very easy to install. But Anthony has a couple of links here for installing these connectors on different types of coax. One of the things that I use is a kit that I bought from DX Engineering that is a set of tools for preparing the coax. For the majority of I've been a ham for 53 years. Coming on 50, it'll be 50, actually it'll be 55 years this year, sorry. 54 years as a ham. And all that time, all I've used is an X-Acto knife and a pair of wire cutters to prepare the cable. But a few years ago, well, this is more than a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I ran across this kit from DX Engineering, which is a set of tools that I'm sold on, and I use that all the time now for preparing all the different types of coax that I use, and it's just wonderful to make. It really simplifies the process. I don't have to sit down and measure anything. I made up actually a measuring guide on my workbench years ago to be able to cut the coax and prepare it. I just used a marker and marked the bench as to where the different things were. But this is easy. You just stick it on the end of the coax and twist it, and it strips off the insulation, it strips off the braid and all of that. Those are just a wonderful tool. Uh-oh.
I was trying to show it, but one second here. Let me just drag it over here.
I could actually go in the other room and grab it, but no, yeah,
that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a nice little kit. They're not inexpensive, but they're great if you do a lot of coax like W6DQ does. We have a lot of coax cables here. It makes it a lot easier. And there's also no shame in buying pre-made cables. There's some very, very good companies out there that make very well-made cables. So you don't have to do anything. You can specify the length of the cable, and they will make it up for you. It's great. But as we point out here, if you're going to come into the house through a wall, you might have to drill a bigger cable, or you might have to have a bigger feed through to get that cable in because it'll have the connector on it already. So that's something to be aware of. So speaking of which, how do you get the cable into the Radio Shack? Well, one of the things we like to use is a bulkhead panel with connectors on both sides. And again, Anthony's got a link there to a video that describes that. And here's some examples of those types of bulkheads there that he's pointing out. It's essentially what I use here. I have a closet, an outside closet with a large plate that has a lot, just like it's the bottom left photograph. It has a bunch of lightning arresters or basically suppressors installed, and I bring all of the antenna cables into that closet. They connect up to those suppressors, and then they go in through a slot cut in the wall into the ham shack and into my switching system, which is in the closet right next to me here behind these racks. And that's how I bring everything in here. So I like that. That's a good way to do it. But and one of the important aspects of that is the fact that I talked about lightning arrestor. Depending on where you live, that can be an important thing. Entry panels like such as this, a closed dryer vent. I have used closed dryer vents before, and they're effective, but you have to take measures to keep vermin from climbing in through the hole, like bugs and rodents and things like that. And PVC pipe, as is shown in that upper right picture, that's another way to do it. But again, you have to seal that so that you don't have things coming in, like bugs and rodents.
And
Yeah.
if you do decide to seal it by just stuffing in cloth, it won't work. So my suggestion is you push cloth in first, followed by metal screening so that the vermin cannot chew their way in. and the cloth will keep the wind from coming in. So you really need a two-pronged attack to keep that from working.
One of the things that works well is steel wool.
Yes.
Steel wool works quite well for that. So for temporary installations, I like the one on the bottom there. That's kind of a temporary setup. I think that's a panel that was available from MFJ. Now the only way you're going to get one of those is to pick one up used because they are no longer in business. But that was a great little product that they made that you can just mount in a sash window like is shown there, and bring your coax in and out. You don't have to make any permanent modifications to your home, which I think is great if you happen to be a renter or you just don't want to drill holes in your walls. There you go.
And Dennis, I have another temporary one. I don't have a picture of it here, but I carry this with me when we're going and we're traveling. If I want to get into a hotel or something like that that has a window or a door, I use pool noodles. They're the long foam things. You can also use pipe insulators. The approximately 3 to 4 inches in diameter, and you can cut a slit in them so you can bring them down close to the window. They'll close up. And the other thing I've used in desperation are towels. Bath towels can be used, but again, only for temporary situations. But I've used the pool noodles quite often when I want to do it through a sliding door or something like that, and want to keep the bugs out.
There's another solution that I've seen recently, and that's it's a specific cable that's designed to go through a window frame, and it's flat.
Yes.
So it's basically a coax connector on one side, a coax connector on the other side, and a little short piece of flat cable, so you can close the window on it. I think that's a useful idea.
Yeah, Comet makes those. I know that's one.
Yeah, Comet makes that. That's one of the antenna manufacturers. Okay, we mentioned antenna tuners before, and that's kind of a misrepresentation of what it is. We call them tuners. I think a better thing to call them is a coupler. They allow the output of the radio to be coupled properly to the antenna. So we're essentially tuning the impedance, the impedance that the antenna presents to the radio, to something that the radio wants to see. And a typical radio wants to see 50 ohms. So if your antenna is like 150 ohms, you're going to have a mismatch. So an antenna tuner can be used to change that 150 ohms or couple that to the 50 ohm output of the transmitter. So depending on what's going on, especially if you're using a non-resonant antenna. For instance, the loop that I have here is cut for 160 meters, but it may not resonate on other bands. But I use it on all bands with an antenna coupler, and that makes it quite useful. I can run that at full legal limit, and I don't have any problems with that. So that's a good thing to be able to do. All right, those are some examples. A couple of those are automatic tuners, which are great. You don't have to deal with turning knobs and all of that. But now, again, MFJ unfortunately is out of business. But the Versatuners, they had a whole product line of Versatuners, all different types of tuners. And of course, you can pick those up on the used market now. And some of them are quite good. So they're a good investment.
And some of them are designed to be installed outside, such as the center one here. It's waterproof. You need to run out the cable to control it outside.
Well, let's see. We talked about different types of antenna tuners. We have, and you just mentioned that, the different types. We've got a manual tuner, which was that MFJ. We have automatic tuners like the two that were shown there, the LDG, which is probably one of the most common automatic tuners. And they've got a full range of automatic antenna tuners. And then the other one, which was that an AH6?
Yes.
Yeah,
it was an ICOM.
ICOM AH6. So that's designed, that particular tuner is designed to be remotely located at something like a wire, basically a random length wire antenna, or a vertical that you locate out in your yard. I like that for mobile with I have an IC7000, and I use the AH6 with that to tune just a whip antenna, like an old CB whip. And it'll tune that everywhere from about 40 meters up to 10 meters without any troubles. A lot of radios today, I won't say all, but a lot of them do have built-in automatic antenna tuners, but they tend to limit the tuning range. You know, you're talking about 3 to 1. We're talking about the SWR range, standing wave ratio. The built-in tuners tend to be able to handle up to 3 to 1, sometimes even less than that. And what happens is if the SWR is higher than that, the transmitter will go into what's called fold back and will reduce the power so as not to damage the output transistors. Very important. So they're fairly well protected against a high SWR. But a lot of tuners, the external ones, can tune a 10 to, very seldom will you find an internal tuner that'll tune 10 to 1, but external tuners will do that fairly easily.
And there's really only two manufacturers I found that have high ratio internal tuners, and that's Elecraft and Zygu.
Yeah.
Most of the other ones are in the 3 to 1 range, somewhere in the
2
2
and
to
a
1.
half to 3 to 1. Yeah, that's right. So here we go, some more links, how antenna tuners work. And that's a good link to check out antenna impedance matching and SWR, more about antenna tuners, how to use a manual antenna tuner. That's a good thing to understand because it can be, you could sit there and spin your tires trying to get something to tune up. And I have a number of manual tuners. I do have a very, very nice automatic antenna tuner made by Palstar that I love for HF, and it's hands off. I just put a little bit of RF into it, and it tunes itself up automatically, which is great. But the last link there, if you have an FT891 using the automatic antenna tuner, and one of the things that Anthony's showing there is a little antenna tuning unit, a little for you'd use that with like QRP, and the
Yes.
other thing is an antenna analyzer. That is an analyzer.
No, these are both tuners.
Oh,
This is a tuner. This is a manual tuner.
That's the Elecraft auto tuner. Yeah.
Yes.
For me. Sorry.
But both of these are for low power only, but they're very portable, and you could easily bring these with you when you're doing Coda or Soda.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't realize that was the tuner. Okay, last but not least, we keep mentioning SWR, standing wave ratio. What this is we talk about this as the ratio of the power in to power out. In other words, the power we put into the feed line out to the antenna, and there's waste power that's reflected back from the antenna because of the impedance mismatch. Or we also talk about that as VISWAR, voltage standing wave ratio. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about standing wave ratio or SWR. People feel that, oh, anything over a 2 to 1 is horrible. You need to have a perfect 1 to 1 match, or your system isn't going to work. If it's more than 2 to 1, you're going to let the smoke out of the transistors or your tubes or whatever you got. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you look at this chart, the losses, in other words, the amount of power that's reflected back by a mismatched SWR, is quite low until you start getting up into some higher SWRs. Case in point, anything between 1.0 to 1 and 1.5 to 1, don't even worry about it. The difference between 100 watts and 96 watts is insignificant. The guy at the receiving end will not be able to discern the difference. Okay? Not discern the difference between that. It's insignificant. When you get up above 1.5, when you're getting into that 2 to 1, 4 to 1 range, you're going to have a little bit more loss. But again, it's not unreasonable. So you're going to lose with a 4 to 1 match. You lose 30% of your power roughly, which is, again, that's not going to make a big difference at the other end. That's not even an S unit. So you got to think about things like that. As you start getting up into higher SWR, 6 to 1 or 10 to 1 or higher, you got to start worrying about other things, because you will build up high voltages and high currents within your system that could cause damage. And getting a lot of power reflected back into your transmitter can cause damage to the transmitter as well. So those are things to be aware of. But that is a misconception that I want to clear up. You don't have to have 1 to 1. I will tell you, one of the amplifiers, I have an alpha amplifier here that's an automatic tuned amplifier. And if the SWR is up at 1.5, it will fault. It's very sensitive to high SWR. So I have to make sure my antennas are matched. It tends to like 1.2 or less, 1.2 to 1 or less, and it'll work just fine. It can do full legal output 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But if I get much above that, it doesn't like it, and it'll definitely go into fault mode. So I have to tune the antenna. So something to be aware of there.
That's it for today, but we want to give you some extra things to go with. Dennis has more slides than I think I do, but that's
No,
we'll
I know
have
that
them
was
next
that
week.
was my last slide. I was just looking to see what else I had here. That was my last slide. Yep. Uh-huh.
So Dennis and I both are involved in the Rat Pack group, and the Rat Pack group is a group that puts on live Zoom sessions every Wednesday and Thursday evening. Now they're very unfriendly times for the UK at 1 or 2 Zulu. So we record them all, and you can get to a list of all these by clicking on the link that's built into this, and you can see that there's over 300 videos that you can watch. And the one I would really suggest for today, there's 2 of them I'd strongly suggest. One is on using Open Feeder by John Pertune. It was back a few days
That's
ago.
just
Here
a
it
few
is
days
right here.
ago. Yeah.
Back in April, using Open Line Feeder. And then I did one back last fall on 10 worst antennas. And it talks, the next part is actually how you can do better. So it's from May of last year. You can watch that video. But there's over 300 videos. About half of them are on emergency communications, the other on general topics. And then the second thing on our link here, we'll skip that over. You can watch the video on Rat Pack at your days. Next week we'll be going into section 3, and in section 3 we'll be talking about setting up your radio, HF challenges, using a computer along with your radio, and what else you need to have handy to be able to get on HF. So again, you can go to the slideshow from this week and get all the information, and it's at tiny.cc, and I didn't show it here. It's at tiny.cc. I'll bring it up here at the very beginning of the recording.
The very first chart. Yeah.
Yes.
For this week.
So we'll turn it back to David, and I'll bring that up and put it up on the screen for you to see, and we'll turn it back to David for any questions you guys might have put in via.
Before we do that, Anthony, I have one thing I want to say. Now, you were here 2 weeks ago, right after Dayton, but did the folks at Norfolk Amateur Radio Club hear about your kudos at Dayton Hamvention?
I think they did. I think they did, but I'm not sure.
If not, we need to extend a big congratulations to Anthony, because he was the recipient of a Special Achievement Award at Dayton this year from the Dayton Amateur Radio Association. Those are the folks that sponsor the Dayton Hamvention. And I had the wonderful pleasure of attending the banquet, which was an invitation-only banquet that Anthony invited myself and my wife to the banquet, and we got to see Anthony receive his award. So that was absolutely wonderful, and I want to thank Anthony again and congratulate him. Thank him for allowing us to join him for the banquet, and congratulate him on receiving that award, because that was totally awesome. Anthony just does an incredible amount of work for the amateur radio community. So just awesome stuff. Thank you for what you do, Anthony.
Well, thank you, Dennis. As my wife says, I got an award for talking too much.
And congratulations from us, Anthony, as well. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to receive. Several of my colleagues and friends from here in the UK, as you must know, went over to Dayton. I haven't made it yet, but I hope to one day. And I think the only question for you, though, Anthony, is where was our invitation for your dinner as well? It's only about
I was limited to 6
you know?
people, and it really became difficult to do
sure.
it. I had a very good friend who was there that I had to turn down, but he was at another banquet. But I had a representative from someone who I had met very early in my career as a ham that's with me all the time, who's a very good friend. Dennis, who I've worked with for years with Rat Pack, and we finally met for the first time in Dayton. We've been doing presentations for over 4 years, and we finally met last month.
We had an eyeball QSO.
Lovely.
That's great.
It is a wonderful way to get together. We actually, as you might have seen at the beginning, and I don't know, I hope you heard what we were saying as well and everything, but as you could see, both of you, from what we've just had quite a weekend. This has been National Field Day weekend. That was the main event that we hang this round, and we've been doing this radioactive, apart from through the pandemic years. We've been doing this every year. So it's a great social event for us as well. And then, of course, later in the year, there are national events like the Hamfest in September, and then in October, they've got the RSGB convention. That's another place that we all get together. And at the convention as well, there's a big dinner in the evening. So, but anyway, once again, Anthony, congratulations. And of course, you've, as well as helping the whole of the amateur radio community. You've helped us quite a lot already and given us quite a few talks. And it's great that you both are giving us this series. So this is a good reminder for you at home now, if you haven't already done so. We've got a couple of questions to ask you both, if you can stay a little longer. But if you have any questions at home on what's been talked about this evening, or any comments on how you found all the various things that they've talked about, if you just want to share that with us, then put it onto BATC or Facebook right away. But we've got two questions. And the first one, if I may, is from Ralph 2M0RHT, who is a member of Norfolk Amateur Radio Club, but lives up in Scotland now. He went back home, as he says, but he's still a member of our club. And he's asked, with radio interfaces from radio to computers, why do radio companies not consider the millions of people who use superior Apple Mac computers, he says? It's going to be that Mac PC argument, I think. For a simple activity such as programming, Apple Mac folks seem to be ignored. Why? How do we get the radio big boys consider the Apple us versus us, the Apple boys like us? I think is what he's saying.
Well, I could talk a little bit about that, but before we even jump into that question, is why are many of them still using interfacing from 25 years ago, or why are they using multiple standards? So there has not been a lot of good consensus among the companies as far as putting out equipment. They finally got around to start using USB, but that took a long time to happen. We were still using RS-232 with computer interfaces when the rest of the world had completely went to USB. So they're not real quick to change, and it's quite often a secondary thought. I don't think a lot of the companies put a lot of thought into the computer interfacing, with the exception of a few companies where the computer interfacing is integral to the operation of the radio. And even then, most of the time, there's very little support involved as far as manpower and hours put into it. One of the things we forget about is commercial software. It has millions of units sold worldwide, whereas a typical ham program is counted in the hundreds or thousands. So having two development teams to be able to do both Windows and Macintosh is beyond probably most of the company's typical workforce. Matter of fact, in many cases, when you really find out what's going on, even in large companies, it comes down to one or two people are doing all the software work for the interfacing.
So I guess they've come together already for the interface in terms of the USB, the actual hardware interface. Now with many of the radios, I wouldn't say most, but because I'm not experienced enough to know that if that applies, but many of the radios now have USB, don't they? So it's really the software we're talking about is the lacking, not the actual interfacing, the connectivity. I mean, I can speak because I'm, as many of NARC members will know, we are big Mac fans. We've got this whole studio here runs on 5 Macs, and so we use it a lot. Now, there are some good programs. I choose ICOM myself personally for radios, and I know that there are some excellent software up there by third parties. It does cost a little bit, but it's not huge amounts. And certainly for the IC7300, the 9700, the 705 and things like that, which are, I know, all just ICOM brands, models, there is some good third-party software. Do you know if there is other good software for, say, Yaesu and Kenwood, who are the other main players in the radio world?
There is some software out there. There's a couple different logging programs. I know Rumlog and Mac, one of the Mac logger. There's a couple of programs out there, and you can rest assured though that sometimes it bites the other way too. If you're a Windows operator, there's some new software that's out only for the Mac. I'm sorry, for the iOS, I should say, to use Linux, the new Yaesu equipment. So there's some interfaces out there that's iOS only for some of the Yaesu equipment. Again, it's written by a third party. And again, they're only doing development in one operating system.
Yeah, the statistics on the user base, they kind of tell the tale, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I am sad to say, a Windows user here, because the preponderance of software that I use here is Windows based for the equipment I have. But if you look at the market share currently, let's see, I don't know what the date, this is pretty recent. Over 72% of the market belongs to PC Windows, Microsoft Windows. So Macintosh iOS is looking at 14, a little below 15%. Linux and Chrome is the other piece that they measured is roughly 6.3%. There's an awful lot of Linux software that Linux tends to be very popular in the amateur radio community, it seems, compared to other areas.
Isn't that
So
because,
that's
Dennis, is probably because it's open, probably the most open operating system, isn't it, to program with? And
absolutely.
of course, lots of us are
Yes.
enthusiasts and experimenters.
Absolutely, myself included with that. Yeah, Linux tends to be well, as you say, open source and all of that. But yeah, that is a problem, and I sympathize with those who use Macintosh and iOS. I understand that. All we can do as a community is campaign with the manufacturers to and the software manufacturers, the developers to do so. I don't know what the status is. I use one of my primary radios here. Actually, several of my primary radios here are Flex radios, and predominantly that's a Windows-based system. But there are other applications out there now that will run with Flex radios. But I'm not sure about Macintosh or Linux platforms.
I think for Flex, there's a third party, isn't it? There's
Yeah, I
produced
think
some
it is a
software,
third party.
but but I believe Flex do endorse it.
It's possible. I haven't looked at that for a long time since I don't use any iOS machines here. Other than the only iOS device I have is this guy right here, and it doesn't talk to my radios. So
Right.
I have a couple of Linux machines, but they're dedicated to certain functions, and so I don't use that with things like the Flex and others. So hopefully that Anthony, I think your comments about the manufacturers has to do with it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's there's a lot of momentum, a lot of inertia that we have to overcome to get change in the community, and it's taken a long time to get where we are right now with just having at least a USB interface. And the sad thing about it is that over that USB interface there are different protocols that are used. So what do you do? You still can't standardize. I think that was what the attempt of CAT was, to standardize the interface, but it still hasn't done that. ICOM has their own. They support CAT, but they have yet another interface that ICOM or Kenwood has their own interface.
It's ICOM. It's a CAT 5 IV.
Yeah,
IV
that's
protocol.
it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's different than the standard CAT that was developed, I believe, by YESA years ago.
And we'll talk a little bit about this next time in the computer portion. Not a lot, but we will discuss this a little bit next time.
Okay, and if it does help you to, if you're making a table or anything, I can certainly tell you which software that I use. I just don't know off the top of my head, but to connect to ICOM radios, there's very good connectivity with some software.
Yeah.
Ralph has come back with just I'm sure you'll understand this in the States, the irony here. As a poor Scotsman, I run an IC718 and ran an Apple Mac for over 15 years. I would have had possibly 4 Windows computers at the same time. Quality over quantity. There we go. That's a true Mac fan for you. I'm not going to add to that.
There you go.
I'm not going to get into that war.
I don't want to jump into stereotypes, but when you say the word Macintosh, it has a natural tendency to invoke Scotland. So.
Oh wow, well done. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I love it. Yeah, that's true. I mean, of course. I mean, I could say as well that many years ago, Apple was in the UK was very niche and really was just run by mainly enthusiasts, and I was looked upon as a strange person liking that. That's changed a bit now. But anyway, I think we should end this conversation about Mac versus PC versus Linux and all the others here.
Nobody will ever win.
Sorry,
I'll tell you, David. The thing was, I worked for years in school districts, and we had both. Yeah. And I would have a lot of my student workers that would come in. They wouldn't want to work on one or the other, or even Linux. And they would always ask me what my favorite operating system was, and I would say the one that I work on that puts money on the table to feed my children. So I said, you want to learn them all. You don't want to have a favorite when it's your wife's income.
Absolutely, no, that's a good diplomatic answer and very understandable. Thank you, Ralph, for that, and thanks to both of you for answering that. I've got lots of compliments for you. Richard M6UES says a really interesting talk for those of us who have only ever used 2 meters since getting our foundation license. That's, of course, our entry-level license. So good point there. Martin G6WNN says, thanks for the really interesting and very well constructed presentation. Looking forward to the next time. And I've got another question for you from Tom K8ZT. Not always possible to predict a storm, so what effective lightning arrestor will best protect a connected rig? Which one of you would like to take that first?
I have
I'll
an
let
answer
Dennis,
for that.
because he's out in the middle of the desert and he gets
Yeah.
the lightning.
A disconnected antenna.
Yes.
Just a simple answer. If you're really worried about that, the best thing to do is to disconnect the antenna and not allow anything to come into your home whatsoever. So you disconnect it where it enters the house and take it outside. But the true answer is there's a lot of things that you can do to protect the antenna and your radios from electrical storms, because it doesn't take a strike directly to your system to cause problems. A nearby lightning strike will induce current into the antenna and feed line. It can induce it into the power lines, your mains. It can induce it into your telephone lines if you have a landline telephone, and all of that can create all kinds of damage. So what's vitally important is to have a proper grounding system for both your antenna, its support, if that happens to be a tower or a mast or whatever you're using, all needs to be grounded. You need to use proper lightning arresters, or what we call static suppressors is another term, where everything enters your ham shack, and those need to be properly grounded, and that needs to go back to your mains ground, which we call a single point ground. The entire system connects together. It's all tied together at one point, so you have one ground. You don't want to have separate ground rods. You don't want to have 10 ground rods in the ground that are all over the place that connect up to things. You can have 10 ground rods. That's great. Make sure they're all connected together with a common cable. And your tower, your feed line, everything gets grounded to that. Your radios, everything. And that'll afford you quite a bit of protection. The only thing you might not ever be able to protect against is a direct hit. But I would recommend, one of the things I would recommend is a book from the American Radio Relay League that's written by Ward Silver, N0AX. It's called Grounding and Bonding. And that is a treatise on the proper way to do things. So that's one thing to have a good look at. And you can get a copy if you don't have a copy of that. That's something that every amateur should have in their library. Frankly, it's a great book. Ward is very, very accomplished author, very technical, and understands that grounding and bonding business very, very well. So I would use him as my #1 resource.
Yeah, and here, basically in Ohio, I pretty much disconnect the antenna from April to September, with the possibility that there might be lightning. I've had 2 lightning incidents. Both have been indirect, that struck neighboring areas, did not strike any of my equipment directly, and both times that I did have damage, it came in through electrical lines and not through the antennas. So even though my cable was completely disconnected, I had voltage induced into my electrical system. One time it took out a TV. It actually burnt the connector right where it entered the back of the TV, which was good news in a way, because it didn't damage any of the TV. It just burnt the connector at the back, which I was easily able to, because lightning is always looking for a way to find ground. And
That's
sometimes, with the case of that TV, it came in one side of the feed line and went right back out the other side of the feed line. So it just burnt the feeder line and did not damage it. But I've had damage to radios and equipment, but they've never been direct hits, and they've never been through antenna feed lines. They've been through the power, or they've been induced directly into the equipment. Sometimes you can have a piece of equipment that's not attached to anything at all, and with a close lightning strike, you will blow out little inductors in the radio, because they will pick up a static charge and amplify it.
So just a case in point, you're talking about personal experience. I've had some personal experiences out here. One of my friends, who's now a silent key, unfortunately, had a direct strike on one of his towers. And the tower and antenna were literally, the antenna literally was blown to pieces, and it was scattered all over the yard. The tower survived, but with a lot of damage. And thankfully, nothing in the Radio Shack was damaged. So that was kind of remarkable. I mentioned the 160-meter loop. If we have any nearby electrical storms, I do disconnect it, because even though it has got suppression on it, I don't trust it 100%. And I will tell you that I have disconnected antenna and drawn half-inch or greater sparks from lightning strikes that are miles away. So that gives you an idea. If you think about a half-inch spark, that's probably tens of thousands of volts that are being induced into that antenna. So that's something to be very wary of, and you really need to get rid of that. So the things like Polyphaser is a good manufacturer of lightning arresters. There's another one that's I got to think of the name of the company. It is available. The company Array Solutions bought the company a couple of years ago, and these are the ones that I use along with Polyphaser. Polyphaser and Array Solutions have good suppressors. Highly recommend doing that. Don't use, there was a thing called let's see, what were those things called? It was a little piece of coax that you stuck in that had a little screw in it. I can't think, they were terrible. You never want to use that. You never want to use that. I can't think of what those things were called.
And we have a VHF UHF presentation that I did with Marty Wohl, that's similar to this series. It's beginners VHF UHF, and in there we do talk a lot more about lightning suppression and running things into the house, etc. So that's available also.
On Rat Pack, Ward did a talk for Rat Pack on grounding and bonding.
Yes.
So you might take a look at that. Look if you search for Ward Silver, W0AX Alpha X-ray. You can find the video on that. And we're trying to get him back here. I spoke with him at Hamvention and trying to get him to come back and do another talk for us in the next few weeks. So keep our fingers crossed.
That sounds good. All right. Thank you very much. I don't think we have any other questions. Brian M7SEY has actually put a note. I can't easily share it with both of you, but I have put it onto BATC. He's written it on Facebook with a link for a Facebook video, which I think goes to a YouTube channel, just about different software from what we can see for different computers. But that's it for questions. And thank you both very much. We look forward to seeing you again in another 2 weeks' time.
Sounds great.
So
this has been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful to meet you as well, Dennis. And thank you
to Anthony, likewise.
As always. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks very much.
Yeah, cheers. And 7-3.
Cheers, 7-3.
7-3.
There we are. Then that's really good. Part 2. And, of course, 2 more parts to come in that series over the next concurrent Wednesdays when we meet. So they're alternate Wednesdays. So we meet again in 2 weeks. So let's just have a reminder of what's happening in the coming week at NARC. On Saturday at 10 o'clock, we've got the Koblenz Sked on 7.123 megahertz. Sunday, 7 o'clock, GB2RS News on GB3MB repeater. On Monday night, at 7:30, the Monday Night Net on GB3MB. And at 8 o'clock, the 80-meter CW net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, week from tonight, we meet at CNS School in Norwich for social informal. And we'll be back here, as I said, in 2 weeks' time. Don't forget to keep us your stories and pictures coming along, and also mystery objects if you've got any of those. And we leave finally tonight on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. We remember all those who gave their lives. And also remember the radio amateurs who were voluntary interceptors or secret listeners who also helped change the course of the war. From Tammy and me, good night.